Hello everyone and welcome to Ethereum Core Developer Meeting number 101. I'm your host Hudson, and first we're going to talk about Yellow v3 and the Berlin client updates. Micah has been kind enough to write up some documents that are in the last comment on the agenda if you refresh the page. And he would like some time to give an overview of everything, which I think would be really helpful as we're talking about some of this. There's been a breakout room discussion, there's been discussion on a few different Discord channels, so he'll give a summary, and then we'll go through first the outcome of the large, basically just all the stuff that Mike is about to talk about, I guess, and see if we can get some Berlin EIP final go and no-go based on our decisions or what we can come up with today. So Micah, you can go ahead.
Okay, some of this is probably going to be review for some of you, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. I will try to go through it relatively quickly, so those of you that already know most of this don't have to suffer through a long presentation or anything. Let me share my screen just so you guys are seeing the document that I'm referring to. And do you guys see that?
Not there.
Yes.
It is.
Okay. So this is one of the documents linked over in the agenda. This is the SSZ and type transactions. This is right up by Piper. It basically just goes over kind of a little bit of why SSZ is nice and how it integrates with type transactions potentially. The main thing I want to talk about with SSZ here is just to try to get everybody on the same page, or at least understanding each other, if not on the same page, of why there is value in switching to SSZ. That's come up several times from many people that ask, well, why SSZ instead of RLP? The core of it comes down to two things. One, as of ETH2 the merge, blocks will be SSZ. That's the current plan, and I believe that the ETH2 team is 100% on board with that, and they fully intend to have blocks be SSZ encoded rather than RLP encoded. And the block hash will change to the Merkle root, or the SSZ Merkle root for that SSZ encoded block. What this gives us is the very interesting property that you can actually, using a single proof and the latest block hash, you can prove the contents of any ancestor of that block, all the way back to whenever you started introducing, whenever we introduced SSZ blocks. So as of the merge, every block in history you'll be able to prove with a single proof and the latest block header, or the latest block hash, sorry. That's obviously very powerful because it lets us do a lot more. There's a EIP right now of saving all the block caches, so just so that we have the ability to do proofs of blocks that are older than 256. With SSZ blocks, we get that for free. Plus, on top of that, you don't actually need to transmit the block header like you do right now. So right now, if you want to validate a block on chain or something, you need to have the block header and then the parent hash or whatever, and then you can verify those two match. With SSZ blocks, we can actually prove individual pieces of data with just a proof, not without having to transmit the entire header. What's more is you can actually do this recursively down into transactions and receipts as well. So in theory, you could do something like, prove to me that there was a log with this index 10 million blocks ago. And with a single proof and the latest block hash, you could get that. And so that's kind of the very high level overview of why SSZ has value to us in the future, because it lets us do some really cool things with proofs. There are some other tangential benefits, like you can, with the proofs, if you have very large data structures, you want to split across multiple blocks or multiple packets, and you're using something like UDP that has packet size limits, then you can prove that, yes, this half packet or this half payload that I sent you in one packet is actually half, and I'm not just DOSing you and sending you garbage data. So those are minor, but the big one is recursive proofs from the hash of the latest block. So moving on, and again, I'm going to go through this very quickly just so we don't waste everybody's time, since I think a lot of you already know this. In order to get that kind of recursive proof stuff, it's very valuable if the receipts routes and the transaction route is also SSZ instead of traditional MPT. So if we have an SSZ hash here, for the transaction route and the receipt route inside the block. Once the merge happens, then we can do things like I just described with the getting a specific log somewhere deep in history. Oh, this is good to know, Alex. Proof sizes are linear in history.
Yeah, I was writing in chat to avoid questions in the middle, so we can discuss it later.
I mean, so normally I would agree with you, but this is important because no one told me this over the last like 2 weeks that I've been talking with people about this. Okay, let's move past it for now. We can research that more later. So the idea is, though, we want SSE, and from the people I've talked to, I think most everybody is generally on board with SSE long term for most of our stuff that's in a block, so the transactions and the receipts and the block itself. So that gets us over to type transactions. This document I'm not going to really talk about. It's basically just discussions about all the problems we run into. This one's the interesting one. So basically what it comes down to is we want 2929 into Berlin. That one's very important because that's 2921 is the gas cost increase for state access opcodes that addresses some DOS vectors against Ethereum. So we really want that one in. And we want to launch Berlin. Like those are our two things that we really want to do is launch Berlin with 2929. We can just do 2929 by itself, nothing else. However, the disadvantage there, as we've discussed, is without 2930, there may exist contracts that are unable to execute within the gas limit due to the gas price increases, and there may also be contracts that now become broken because the gas costs increase and they were dependent on low gas costs. And so because of that, we want 2930. If we then add 2930 in, that's great. The disadvantage of just doing those two alone, 2930 is optional access lists. If we just do 2930 and 2929, we do not introduce 2718, then what we end up with is basically a bunch of technical debt because we're introducing a third transaction type. So we currently have pre-155, post-155, and they're kind of the same shape, but you switch on the value of V to determine which type it is. We'll now be introducing a third transaction type without any sort of type mechanism or versioning system, which means we're going to have to both switch on V for 155, post 155, and we're going to switch on the length of the the number of items in the RLP encoded array for that. So that leads us to, well, that kind of sucks. We don't want to just introduce all that technical debt, especially if we know we're going to do 2718 or something very similar to it in the near future. So that leads us to, okay, let's add in 2718. If we add in 2718 on that, transaction discrimination is dirty, to say the least. It's not as bad as without, but it's still dirty because now you're switching on that first byte, and then if the first byte is different, you have to switch on the V value. Not too bad, not amazing, but it's not terrible. It also introduces technical debt because if we just introduce 2718, we do not introduce SSZ, which means there'll be RLP for 2930 transactions and legacy transactions. Then we're basically saying, yes, we all agree we're going to do SSZ transactions down the road, but not yet. And so we're just introducing a new piece of code that we'll then have to change later, which means we have to go through some sort of transition process for 2930 transactions. We need to deprecate them. We have to deal with dual hashing, which I'll talk about in a moment, stuff like that. That leads us to the next option, which is to do all the three of those, plus add SSE and for 2930. So 2930 would be SSE, legacy transactions will still be RLP. Big disadvantage for this one is the clients would need to integrate SSZ before Berlin. I think everybody knows that that's kind of the big contention before switching from option 30 to option 40. There's also, this is kind of like we're introducing SSZ, but only half. So like we're not wrapping legacy transactions SSZ as well. So we still have legacy transactions as RLP. So we've got like this dual system where we've got half the transactions are RLP, half the transactions are SSZ. It's not terrible, but when you want to do things like SSZ unions, which would be really convenient for switching and clean up the code for transaction type discrimination, it gets awkward because we can technically do it because we can just flag the 3 RLP transactions by their first byte, but we can't do just SSZ at like an earlier phase in the decoding process. So again, not terrible, not great. This gets on to option 50. Option 50 is saying basically all of the stuff we just talked about, plus we do 2972, which is the wrapped legacy transactions, and we wrap them as SSZ. And so this was basically saying, we're just going to eat all the costs right now, and we're going to go move over to SSZ transactions with Berlin. And the nice thing here is there's basically no technical debt. We get rid of some technical debt like EIP 155. We are ready for the merge. Like this is kind of just take on a bunch of work right now so we don't introduce technical debt and so we can pay down some technical debt. Big disadvantage, of course, there's a lot of work involved here. The other big disadvantage is transaction hash for legacy transactions will change. And this isn't by itself necessarily a showstopper, but it can create some problems with around the fork block, because someone can submit a transaction around the fork block and then the client says, okay, here's our transaction hash, but then the transaction sits in the pending queue until after the fork block and then gets mined, and that transaction hash never got mined. There's some things we can do, such as storing in memory both hashes, just so if anyone asks for one, we can send the get the other. We can send a positive response saying, oh yeah, we have that transaction here. Again, I want to emphasize this one is a lot of work. Do not get me wrong, but it does pay down some technical debt and simplifies things. Like clients saying, can't get rid of 1.5 though, since the transaction sig depends on it, correct? So yes and no. So yes, we still have the signature. We'll still have to switch on that. But we can at least split out the two transaction types. So we can have, like, when it comes to decoding and processing and everything except for signature validation and signing, we can actually distinguish them as two different types. So we can have type 0 and type 1. That's the advantage of the 2972 with like, you are correct. We are not getting rid of all of the technical debt from 155, but I think we're getting rid of like maybe half of it. So the discussion for us is, which of these options are going to go with, or do we want to try to find something in between them? My personal preference, just to kick off the conversation, is I'm an extremist, so I like option 10 or option 50. The reasons are, my main reason is I don't like technical debt. Back in a long time ago when I actually did software engineering 40 hours a week, technical debt drove me nuts. I hated how much time I would spend working around old code and bit rot and stuff like that. And so I'm very much for any option that does not increase technical debt and or pays down technical debt. And 10 and 50, 10 doesn't increase any technical debt because we're just doing 2929, we're just throwing everything else out. 50 pays down some technical debt and gets us closer to our final goal, and so we don't add new technical debt that we're gonna have to pay down later. That being said, I know most people are not extremists like me. They're concave or convex or whatever it is, and so I suspect we'll land somewhere in the middle. So any questions? I know that was very fast. Like I said, I think most of you already know all of this. They're just trying to summarize.
I do have a question. So yeah, so essentially my question is that internally, so currently clients, internally you shuffle data structures via hash. So everything, every time get does something with the transaction, it does it via hash. Every time we do something with the block, we do it via hash. Now, from an internal perspective, I cannot just simply start using a different hash. So I mean, even if, for example, if we're saying that, okay, now the fork block will come, and so all of a sudden we need to swap out the hashes. From a client implementation perspective, this means that when I start up Geth, at some point in time, I need to start up Geth, where Geth is just going to say that, okay, from now on, I'm not using RLP hashes anymore internally. I'm using SSD hashes internally. That would be fine. But then things start getting funky on the networking protocols too, because all the ETH protocol will just ask hashes via RLP hashes. Or
Yep.
it's I mean, it's definitely doable. We can definitely say that that we could definitely roll out a new ETH protocol which speaks SSD, and then you know whether the hash is SSD or RLP, and then you can maintain both hashes for some period and then somehow handle both. But it's quite a big can of worms. So
Yeah,
all in all,
that does not surprise me at all.
I kind of look at this as a separate piece of technical debt that we can look at, but yes, that is going to be problematic in whatever transition period. regenesis is an option that's on the table for us for dropping some of that historical technical debt. So if we do this and then we do regenesis afterwards, then we get an option to essentially forget about all of that RLP hash history. I don't have a complete answer for you, but those are that's one direction that lets us at least eventually address that.
So I see one objection with the whole regenesis thing, that in theory, yes, that means that you can write a client which will only speak the protocol after the regenesis event and that won't handle anything else. But from a Geth maintainer perspective, that's probably not something we can afford, because we cannot afford to just say, well, screw you guys, from Geth version 2, you cannot access Ethereum 1 anymore. So it's a, yeah, it's a problematic thing. So it does that approach, I don't think it helps us much personally. But the other thing is that what I wanted to get at is that I don't think so. I have no problem with SSD or transitioning into SSD. The point I wanted to make is that I don't think it's realistic to shove it into Berlin, because it will just delay Berlin forever. And I would rather say that if we want a transition to SSD, then we should have something that does not contain other stuff. Rather, it just focuses on the transition to SSD. For example, we could have a hard fork after Berlin. And then there we can say that, okay, so this hard fork will contain a new ETH protocol version, will contain a new Snap protocol version, will contain a new, I don't know what. And then we can actually focus on just the challenges of SSD. So it seems that this is a whole new can of worms, and it seems to me very, very brave move to try to cram it into Berlin.
I'm curious what other client devs think of that. That idea of a, I don't know, you can call it a technical debt hard fork, where we double down on cleaning up the protocol some.
So in the past, we've tried to have or we've discussed having these closed hard forks, and where we just focus on stuff that's already committed and whatnot. And I think the challenge is priorities change so much in 6 months that it becomes like an untenable promise. So not that I disagree with anything Peter says. My opinion is also SSZ is way too big to kind of shove into Burden right now. But I think if we, it can be priority number 1 after Berlin is out. But I suspect that if it takes 6 months to do, some other things will have become high priority as well, and we might not be able to do just an SSZR fork, but we might be able to do it along with other stuff, or if it goes quicker than expected, do just that. But yeah, I'm skeptical of the idea that we can freeze priorities for I don't know, 6 months, given how much other stuff is being worked on.
Well, I completely agree with that. So I do think priorities and other stuff creeping in would be a big problem. But if you ask me, if we add in SSD, I don't think we're going to ship Berlin in the next half year. That's my personal opinion.
Oh, yeah, and to be clear, I agree. But I think we should probably do SSZ right after Berlin. But
and maybe 1559 or maybe
or
account abstraction,
whatever else,
or maybe
or there's going to be a binary tree. And I just, yeah, it feels like there will be something else that will be a high priority after Berlin as well. And that'll just commented in the chat, the Ice Age, that's coming. So yeah, I think it's totally fine to push it out after, but I think it would be unrealistic to expect that SSZ will be your sole focus after Berlin.
Do we have other client teams who have opinions on this, or questions or things like that to bring up for discussion?
Yeah, but I agree with Peter. Basically, it is a big step, including even partially SSZ. I would really like if we can have some initiative to, if you want to switch to SC, to switch it completely. This partially switching transaction receipt and leaving blocks as this, it could be problematic. But yeah, I agree what he said.
Can you scroll down to option 50, Micah?
I would like to ask. So, Peter, would your preference then be option 30?
Which one was that again?
That is where we do so. Oh wait, sorry.
So essentially, my preference would be everything and the kitchen sink except SSD.
Yeah, it'd be option 50 minus SSC. That sounds like.
Or, okay,
Option 50
I
has
don't know about.
dependence.
I don't know about all the details about all these options, so I don't want to say option 50 minus
Yeah.
SSD. But the idea is that, yeah. So essentially, I would try to solve as many problems as possible without mixing in SSD into the soup.
Micah,
So
is that more
you're
50 or 30?
29.72.
Because it sounds like 30, because I think 50 requires SSC.
Well, so where we were last all core dev call was EIP 2029 plus EIP 2930 plus 2718. And then we were discussing 2972, which kicked off this discussion and for this whole week. So like we're at least as far as Berlin planning has been, we are up to those three options. So the last one is, can we do 2972 without SSC and do everything else without SSC? Then that's the kitchen sink minus saving SSC for later.
We can. Yeah, so we can add 2972 without SSC. The caveat is that we just have to all remember that we're just adding, we're adding a wrap transaction around legacy transactions that we're then going to have to wrap again later with SSC. And so we're introducing a new transaction type for wrap legacy transactions that we know we're going to have to delete sometime as soon as we add SSC, whenever that happens. And so if that's what people want, we can do, that is an option on the table. I didn't include it here just because it seems very weird to me personally to introduce wrapped legacy transactions knowing that we're going to have to wrap them again in 1 or 2 hard forks. That just seems awkward, but maybe it's worth it. I'm not a client dev, so you guys know.
Could we do 2718 without 2972? Because I thought that was one of the conclusions, is we needed to wrap the transactions to be able to do it.
So we can do 2718 without SSE and without 2972. Caveat there is that transaction discrimination is awkward and uncomfortable. And again, we have some technical debt there because we're introducing 2930 without SSE, knowing that we're going to switch over to it. Okay. That might be, that's option 30 basically.
What did Peter, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a quick thought that around 2 things. So Micah, you said that one of the problems is that we would need to wrap legacy transactions a second time. Well, I would say that my suggestion would be to simply deprecate legacy transactions, so that, for example, in the Berlin hard fork, we would launch it, but we will say that legacy transactions will be dropped in the next hard fork. And essentially you have 1 hard fork worth of time to transition from this wrapped legacy transaction thing into the proper way to encode transactions. And then the next hard fork can simply just drop it and not have to do the double wrap. So this was one thing that I wanted to say. And the other thing is, let me just quickly finish. So the reason I think SSD will take an insane amount of time is because essentially every client needs to roll it out and activate it at the same time. And it seems to me super dangerous. And I mean, everything will go wrong. But so the moment you add SSD to the consensus, it's a very dangerous path. However, a more gradual transition into SSD could be to start upgrading, for example, the ETH protocol. We could launch ETH 60, whatever, which will, for example, run with SSD. And then, for example, Geth can implement it, and then Trinity can implement it, and whatever can implement it. And we don't have to roll it out all at the same time. Clients can implement it whenever they want. They can talk to other clients. They can test whether the whole thing works. If we roll out this networking thing, that yes, this implicitly also means that clients would need to maintain the RLP hashes and SSD hashes too, because all of a sudden you can have, if depending on the protocol version, the hashes will be this or that. And the point of this would be that this would be going towards very heavily towards the direction of integrating SSD and phasing out RLP without actually doing this hard flip that, okay, now everybody must speak perfect SSZ. Rather, you could have this mix and match evolving thing. So that's just a random idea of how we could do this transition without too many risks.
Rye, what were you saying?
And do we have a plan with regards to the RLPX transport protocol itself? So now it looks like even if we fully transition to SSZ, we will still have RLPX transport, which pulls RLP library and RLP serialization. So do we plan to switch DevP2P to that too?
I don't think that there's anything in like DevP2P calls it RLPX, but it doesn't actually have anything that's that specifically makes things dependent on RLP.
Messages are RLP encoded.
I think what Peter's talking about is using SSC for message encoding over DevP2P.
Yeah, so for example, what I would do for the first time is to just, for example, just switch over the ETH subprotocol so that the messages are SSC, or if, okay, I haven't thought about it too much, but if that would mean also, well, we could also, for example, bump the dev peer-to-peer version number, and then all of a sudden it's SSZX, not RLPX. So dev peer-to-peer does contain version numbers, so it's perfectly fine to so for example, Geth can speak dev peer-to-peer version 4 and 5. I think the snappy encoding is the difference. So we can launch a sixth one where the RLP versus SSZ encoding would be the difference. And then again, any client that does not yet implement SSZ can do one thing and every other another. So yes, there are a lot of challenges here, but the point would be that networking can be rolled out with errors potentially, because the worst thing that happens is that somebody disconnects, and you can always implement some fallback that if something feels weird, then you just revert back to the current networking version, and then everything works fine. So it allows you to make bugs. It allows you to experiment without the risks of breaking things too much.
Rye, I think I interrupted you earlier when you had a comment, if you still had one.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that the Micah's point about the transaction type discrimination being dirty, it is dirty, but it's only dirty in one place, and it's quite simple for now. So I think there's a trade-off here, obviously. Like, we're all talking about trade-offs and people on different sides of this, but it's not a terribly dirty discrimination, and it keeps Berlin moving, and we can get 2929 in without the option 10 kind of nuclear option where we just do 2929. We at least pay down some technical debt, or at least prevent future technical debt by making sure we have type transactions. And yeah, from a client dev's perspective, like option 30 looks good.
Is it option 30 plus
It's
wrapping
just out of
transactions?
curiosity, do the
What was that, James?
Is it option 30 but also still wrapping transactions in the meantime? So that you add that piece, right?
No, I think it's just option 30 and you don't wrap the transactions.
So out of curiosity, is that true for the other clients as well? Does everybody feel like the discrimination dirtiness is isolated and constrained, or? I know this is something that might differ by client.
And they might need to look at it actually to see. And then Peter, you had your hand raised?
Yeah.
Or Martin, if you want to go.
Oh, sorry, I just
Yeah.
had my hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I just think that I don't terribly mind if it's a little bit of dirtiness somewhere, if it keeps if it makes us being able to ship Berlin a lot faster and get these things in.
Yeah, so it's looking like, so option 30 is everything except 2972 and SSZ, right? Yeah, I just looked it up. So if that reduces one, there's two cons on option 30. The second one is introduces technical debt that will eventually have to want to convert all 2718 transactions to SSZ. And we are introducing more transaction types that are going to have to go through a transition process or be deprecated. And Peter was talking about the possibility of just deprecating legacy transactions at that time, but iteratively working toward full SSZ eventually. I think that's how I'm reflecting the conversation.
And I don't know if it's Matt Garnett on the call, but if it's option 30 that's on the table, I think the current implementation for Go Ethereum, the PR is pretty close to being, pretty close to done, more or less.
Okay, one thing we can completely eliminate right now, I think, because everything's tending toward let's not do SSZ from the few client devs who've spoken up, but is there anyone who really wants SSZ in Berlin for any reason, or can we kind of toss out half these options now that we don't want SSZ? Is there any, if anyone wants SSZ in Berlin, speak up now. Okay, so what we have left then is, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to speak up against SSD again, because so if Ethereum, if we strongly feel that SSD is the future, I think we can agree that Ethereum to went that way and it's fine to go that way. But I think I really strongly feel that we should introduce SSD in non-consensus places first, and then transition into consensus.
Cool. Okay.
I also want to say that I like that idea of doing it at the protocol layer first. It's pretty, or like at the networking layer first. That's a pretty interesting way to do it in a way that's safer and lets all of the different clients on board to it in a nice, clean way. So that's a nice idea.
So the one thing I just want to make sure we're on the same page on. So Peter mentioned earlier about deprecating, just saying like when we launched Berlin, let everybody know, hey, we're going to deprecate legacy transactions. The impression I got was that deprecation of an old transaction type is like a 2-year process. Like this is not like a quick thing that we do in a couple of months. This is like we tell people, hey, your signatures will stop working in 2 years. We don't tell them your signatures will stop working in a week or a month.
Well, we're going to tell them your signatures will stop working when we ship SSZ, and that's going to take 2 years. Yeah, I'm just agreeing with you. My point really is that we're not going to ship SSZ in a month. So obviously, hopefully, it's not 2 years, but you're not actually telling people that their signatures will stop working in a month. Maybe in half a year, the soonest.
Yeah, so we give like a time period of like half a year, and then it will potentially take us longer than that, and that's fine.
Hudson, do we have contact points with hardware wallet manufacturers? Because those seem like the hardest places to deal with legacy transaction deprecation.
Shit.
Which we don't have to talk about right now, I'm realizing, and we should probably focus on other things that are more relevant for Berlin.
Yeah.
No, actually, I think this was a super important point, a super good point that Piper made. We won't be able to get hardware wallet manufacturers to upgrade. I mean, some of them might support, but I think it's super bad move to brick somebody's hardware wallet or tell somebody that, hey, you need to update your firmware because we just screwed you. So I think that's a super strong point against dropping legacy transactions.
Something that I thought of and that I think has been thought of before is maintaining support for legacy transactions through a precompile. So they may not be submissible at the protocol layer, but looking into ways to make them still executable via submitting them internally to a precompile or something like that.
Okay, but that's something we can think of beyond Berlin.
Yeah, The only reason I wanted to bring it up for this, just because we just want to make sure that we all understand what this means of introducing this technical debt. This is technical debt that's going to go away in a couple of years, maybe.
Yeah.
Can I
Okay.
ask something quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Um, what if we did, something where we only use SSE for the signature of the transaction? So whenever we determine what hash we're going to sign, we use SSE to calculate that. Obviously, that goes against the things that people have said about wanting to make SSE not introduced at the protocol level initially. But from my point of view, it seems that this signing hash is the one fixed constant. Pretty much everything else we can shuffle around at the protocol to meet whatever needs we desire, and we can modify the RPC endpoints to give whatever data that people are expecting. But if we don't support SSE at the transaction signature, we will always have to continue supporting RLP for end users.
Actually, the thing that will break hardware wallets.
Sorry, I mean for new transactions. Of course, we can't change it for the legacy ones, but as we add new transactions, if we use SSE for their signing hashes, it would be possible to in the future completely convert those sorts of things to 100% SSE.
Mm-hmm. Wait, did we lose Micah? Is he back?
He's not back yet. He's back.
I'm back. Sorry. The Zoom starts playing people's audio from like 4 minutes ago over top of whatever we're hearing, so I can't understand anything.
Oh.
Can someone summarize the question real quick? I heard half of Light Client's suggestion before I had to reconnect.
Yeah, I was just asking, to me, it seems that the one fixed constant in terms of trying to make radical changes in the future is what is the format of the hash that we have to sign for transactions. And so if that's RLP, then we always have to support RLP at that point in time. We can never change that to SSE, otherwise we'll break people's wallets, etc. But if we make that SSE, there is a lot of things that we can do within a client in terms of modifying everything to be SSE, having RPC endpoints that reorganize the information to RLP for legacy people listening to those RPC endpoints, etc. But the thing that we can't change is the signing.
Hardware wallets signs not the hash, but the transaction is full. So they expect as they input the transaction in full, RLP encoded, which they can decode, pulls at least some data, and display. At least Ledger does similar thing, and they don't just sign a hash. They recalculate the hash.
But what he's saying is basically that would only work for the legacy transaction, but for the new ones it would be SSD. So,
yes.
And your hardware wallet wouldn't be able to sign something which has an access list anyway. So, yeah, it's an interesting idea.
So I think the con there is just that we're back into introducing SSZ. We only have to introduce the SSZ serialization part. We don't have to introduce SSZ Merkleization. And so the risk of consensus failure is lower, but it is still an introduction of new code, which I don't know how a client devs feel about introducing just like a little bit of SSZ, just the serialization.
The other thing I was thinking, I ended up thinking that maybe SSE is exactly this, but what if there was an agnostic format that was as simple as possible? And SSE's full name is simple serialized, and so maybe that SSE is that format. But what if we just have a transaction signing format, which we just say, let's use this very simple serialization format, whatever that is. We will use this forever in the future because we don't need special Merkleization techniques. There's not its special advantages. This is just an ephemeral format that we serialize and then we KCAC. That's it. And so if we just say that this was what it will be forever, we don't have to worry about, okay, what if in 10 years we come up with this new serialization scheme that allows us to do, all these great features and we want to upgrade it. Now it's like we've said that signatures will always be this. Yeah.
I think that's not unreasonable, and we could use RLP for that. Like in theory, we can have SSD transactions over the wire and in blocks and everywhere. But when you get that SSD transaction, you decode it into some in-memory data structure, and then you RLP encode in a very specific way, and then keck that to get the hash, which you then sign. That's definitely possible, and we, like I said, we could do that without introducing SSD if we wanted.
So, excuse me, bringing this back to what we're going to do for Berlin. Um, I know we've had some suggestions of, Peter, you had said put in everything except SSZ. Um, so, I want to just make sure that I'm right that option 50 without SSZ is a possibility. Is that possible, Micah, or does SSZ required for any of those EIPs or would break things or stuff like that?
SSD is not a hard requirement for anything. It is just, there's different levels. How much technical debt do we want to incur by not doing it? That's the only thing with SSD.
Okay. Can anyone give an argument of pros and cons between 30 and 50 if we drop SSZ entirely? Does that change the formula a little bit if we're dropping SSZ? Or is
The
it
other
literally?
difference between the two is adding EIP 2972.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the do we have wrapped legacy transactions EIP or not?
All right. Other opinions on what path we should go down for Berlin, and if anyone has any insight into how much time it would take? Because I guess if we don't want Berlin to be pushed out forever, what's the how long would it take for anyone to implement EIP 2972, which is the wrap legacy transactions? Is that something that would take a while, or like more than 2 months?
2 months. This is a meta comment, but we've had a fair number of EIPs ready to go for Berlin for a long time, and more of them keep arriving.
That's
And
why I'm asking how long it would take so that we can,
I'm saying, why do we need, is there a reason that any of this has to go out now? Why can we not release what has been ready for many months?
I think we realized
Has
once.
been ready for many months.
Oh, go ahead, Peter.
What has been ready for many months?
James, you're the keeper of the list. If I'm out of line, if I'm out of line, fine. But certainly 2315, which I care about, and there were other things on the list at that time.
Yeah, 2315's been around for a while, but
and others. It's November.
Oh, so even though it looks so the one you're talking about is independent and has been somewhat ready, and the gas change ones or whatever, but the rest of them are actually kind of together. Like there's a reason we're having this discussion with the different versions of all the EIPs, and we're talking about them all at the same time. It's because they're all interrelated. So as far as what's been talked about for Berlin, everything has been discussed except for if we do 2972. Like all EIPs that have been talked about for Berlin and we've been getting ready for are to the point except for 2972 wrapped legacy transactions. So we're having this final conversation today, or hopefully final, we'll see, of is 2972 needed to be in, given the context that SSC is something that we'll tackle on the network layer first.
And why do is there an option that just says all of this can wait? Let's get Berlin out and pick this up ASAP perhaps, but
I think
my take on that is that the most important thing to ship is not the subroutines, it is the denial of service protections in 2929.
I'd agree that the 2015, it's not the most important, but there's just been a number seems ready for a long time. I'm afraid this is never ending. We're starting to look like Oracle on a 3-year cycle.
And then the other part is, I would say, is type transactions are important given the context of what's coming in next year. So
And also, if we don't want to break everything, right? Like I think,
yeah,
yes, we could ship,
yeah, that's
but
also
we
a good
could
point.
ship 2315 and 2929, you know, alone, but then we break a bunch of smart contracts. People are obviously mad that their stuff is broken, and that's why we have 2930. And then introducing that requires a new type of transaction. And if we're going to do that, that's why we had 2718. So I see, I understand that 2315 has been ready for almost a year. And I agree that it's quite a long time, but
it breaks nothing.
Yeah, was there analysis done
we just
on
try to finish
anything?
this discussion?
Pardon, Martin, I spoke over
Yeah,
you.
I mean, so you kind of rode the discussion off in a tangent, and I was just hoping we could try to instead finish the discussion.
In the intention of discussing us being meta stuck, we've become stuck about being meta stuck.
Okay.
Sorry, I was talking. I thought I was off mute.
Yeah, you're mute. You're mute, Hudson.
Oh, I'm back. Okay, but yeah. So, Greg, in the famous words of that time Amin was here, we can talk about it offline for specifics of why it will break or not break. But one thing is, I think we're getting really close to picking these because we're not doing SSZ. And all we really have left is figuring out if anyone wants to really advocate for putting 2972 in Berlin. I think that's where we are. Am I wrong, anybody?
That's also what I'm seeing is if we've talked is that's like the last piece.
Cool. I think we should go with option 30 unless someone wants to put 2972 in and has a reason and wants to advocate for that.
I don't totally understand the difference of what's more messy between doing it without 2972 or doing it with 2972 with the context of deprecating old transactions in the next like 9 months.
Well, we're kind of starting to say we can't do that anymore.
Well, my understanding was that the major push for 2972 was the Geth team because of the way transactions were handled in their client, especially in terms of actually creating the Merkle Patricia root of the transaction hash. But I'm not sure if that's still the case.
I don't so it's not really implementation. I guess it's you. You actually wrote the PR, which which kind of works. So I mean, code-wise, we have to maintain a transaction type anyway, whether that's a Go type or type flag or whatever. And then when you encode and you calculate the hash, it's it's fairly trivial to say that type 0 transaction is encoded with one special rule and type others with some other special rule. So I don't think it doesn't really matter from an implementation perspective. It was just out of code cleanliness, whether the idea was just to not have too many weirdnesses in the code. But at this point, I would say that whatever is simplest and easiest to implement might be better. And maybe we can tweak it in the future. So if this whole 2972 introduces a lot of extra complexity around legacy transactions, then we might as well just leave legacy transactions as they are now and just special cases that, yes, this is a prehistoric thing in Ethereum, and we know that it's a bit weird, but it's what Ethereum 1 was, and period.
Got it.
So I'm not really married to
So
this.
reading over.
Go ahead, Michael.
Reading over Martin's gas reprice write-up. In the summary, I'm probably reading this wrong, but it looks like you're basically saying that everything's fine. Like we don't actually need 2930. I'm guessing I'm misreading this.
No, you're not misreading it. What you're reading is that on these small segments of blocks analyzed on Gurley in that particular block range, there were no such ones.
I see. Okay, so we don't. So it's a fear of the unknown, basically. Here, we don't know if there exists things that will break, but it's possible that there are. Is that correct?
Yes, and previous analysis. Yeah, well, I said a couple of weeks ago that I would rerun the same thing for mainnet for a larger block portion, and I have not. I haven't done so. I haven't gotten the time to do it. Well,
Because
yeah, I simply
dropping
haven't done it.
2930 definitely is. Dropping 2930 is by far the fastest and easiest way to get Berlin out. Like that solves all of our problems. So I'd be, if we think that we can quickly analyze whether we need 2930, like need, that may be a simple solution. But unless someone has like tools ready to go for analyzing that, I'm guessing that's a big chunk of work.
Yeah, I mean, Geth has built-in tools to analyze that, and it can be done. The question is more like, okay, so if we analyze 500 blocks and find no such transactions, are we then okay with that, or how? I mean, how much is enough? How sure do we need to be?
Is the tooling something that we can't just run over the whole chain?
Yeah,
okay.
I would say.
I accept that answer.
Alex
How
is
long would it
laughing.
take- How long would it take to run it over the last million blocks?
I can't say. But the thing is,
Can we help
it's not-
run it over the last million blocks?
it's not only the question of running it over the blocks. So there is some yeah. Either there is some manual analysis step that needs to be performed afterwards, or the tooling must be better refined to figure everything out on its own. And if we want to run it on 1 million blocks, then obviously we want to minimize the manual post-processing.
I'd say that it would be really unfortunate for us to introduce a new transaction type that we have to deal with going forward if it's not necessary.
And yeah, a lot of the issues that are coming up here is because we're assuming we're definitely going to introduce this new transaction type, and it would be great for the health of the network if we could just get that DOS protection out without these other things.
Yeah, creative ideas. Can we like bounty this with the community and say, we will pay somebody, X $1,000 if you can show us a historical transaction that would fail under these new pricing rules, and do, commit to doing some analysis ourselves as well. And if we can't find it, and if nobody in the community can find it, then we don't do it, because it seems, I get that the like extremely responsible thing to do, or I don't want to call it responsible, but the like bulletproof thing to do is to have this mechanism in place. But if we really need it, then it seems really unfortunate to implement it and deal with the debt that it's going to introduce.
So I'm just looking at ETH Magicians right now, and the CTO of Scale Labs seems unhappy with 2929 because of the gas cost changes. He didn't provide like a specific example and about it, but that might be somebody who could help. Yeah.
I think a lot of people are unhappy anytime we increase gas costs.
Yeah.
I think he's particularly unhappy with many things that are posted there.
As far as
and some practical.
It's going to affect many DeFi apps, but didn't specify which ones.
What were you saying, Alex Vlasov?
Yeah, for a person who is outside of this a little bit, and just from a completely practical perspective, if storage is restructured and maybe binary miracleization is implemented, then there is no need to increase the price because latency of accessing the storage is going to be much smaller than right now, as was demonstrated by Trubaga's team. Maybe instead of this and 3 months of discussion and implementation on this part, it would be better to agree on this, on decisions that it's going to be a breaking change and just fix this problem from the ground up. So it would make everyone happy except people who actually have to write it, but they still have to write it at some point.
I have a question on for EIP 2930. Is that something we could leave out, and if we find out later that there is a transaction that is actually broken, implement a fix then, or is that like pretty worse?
I believe we can do that. But we still have to solve all its problems like then instead of now.
Okay.
And then if we didn't have 2930, would we also remove type transactions?
For Berlin, yes. I would say if 2930 doesn't go in, we should cut all of the stuff in my options list. Like if we don't need 2930, that's the only reason all of this falls out is because of 2930. So just 2929, we're done. We can release Berlin tomorrow.
Is there if we do like let's say the next fork is let's say that an upcoming fork, I don't want to be quoted wrong here, that has 1559 type transactions. If we do, is there a good reason to say like take this work now of having type transactions work and then make sure they work before trying to do more things at once? Like,
so one thing that makes it easier is just, you know, if type transactions are already a thing on mainnet, then, you know, 1559 and I assume the account abstraction folks and whatnot, we can just take it for granted that those things, that we can use those things. Otherwise, it's just, you know, like kind of this chicken and egg thing where like, we don't want to change the 1559 spec to depend on 2718 because we don't want to add this extra dependency if it's not going to be on mainnet. So you're kind of, you know, circling. So it's not the end of the world, but it does make it easier if it's already on mainnet and it's already used for other projects to like leverage that.
I think that'd be an issue if 2718 were more controversial, but I think what's more controversial is just the timing of it, right? Like I think that it's safe for 1559 and other EIPs to depend on 2718 because we're all pretty much in favor of the idea of it. The problem is like, okay, can we actually get Berlin out faster without it?
Can we strawman that? If this was the beginning of the discussion of the next hard fork and we're talking about putting something like proposal 50 in, which has all of the SSE stuff, is there anybody here who would be speaking out against that or saying, I don't think that that's the right use of our time? Silence maybe here means that that's correct.
Yeah, I'd say so. I have an idea. What about this? We do analysis of the last however million blocks, and Martin, there was a company that helped us do analysis in the past the last time we were thinking we were going to break stuff. Do you remember what that company is?
Yeah, well, I reached out to both of these, both of them a couple of months ago. But actually, the stuff that's built into Geth is better. But it's going to be a lot of work. But I can try to sort it out. I still think there's an additional benefit of 2930 in that it provides access list, which can later on be used when we start using witnesses and stuff.
Okay, and looking all this up would take time, and we're kind of in a holiday season.
Analysis today, then it like you can make a contract and the transaction which will fail in your analysis at this moment in time, just so a person who would want to stop this from being implemented and requiring 39 to do it. So it's kind of pointless. You cannot guarantee this. Like you cannot guarantee the non-existence of the contract which will not break.
Yep.
Yes, it's easy to make one.
And you could have a new
I
DeFi
mean-
farm 2 days before the hard fork, you know.
I
Yeah.
mean, we can call the cutoff yesterday. Like, if it didn't exist yesterday,
Well,
then-
then another option that your DeFi protocol hits in. Between
Say
this
again?
point in time, as was mentioned by Tim, I think, then maybe new DeFi protocol comes in, which is popular in next months and 1 month before the fork.
yeah, okay, that's fair.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, especially since Martin mentioned that there are other benefits to 2930, maybe 30, option 30 might be best. What were you going to say, Micah?
I was going to say that core devs and security auditors and everybody has been screaming at people for the last year, do not make your transactions dependent on gas costs. They will change. At this point, if you are writing contracts that depend on gas costs, it is your fault. Like, we have done everything that is in our power to stop these people from doing it. I sit in chat rooms all day and people say, oh, I'm just going to do this gas check. And I immediately type up and say, no, don't do that. Here's why. Here's 17 articles by professionals and auditors and core devs. Stop it. We have to, at some point, cut people off and say, we are not going to support you switching on gas costs anymore. And I think that point was like 6 months ago. And so while I agree that we should be checking old transactions, I do not think that we should care about transactions that were released yesterday or last week, because those people should know better by now. And if they don't,
I think you're forgetting something. So the problem is not only, it's not about checking explicit gas costs. It's about contracts that deposit using the Solidity send, and they provide, it winds up with only the 2300 gas at the recipient, and they try to do a check an S load, and they fail. And the contract that did the deposit was hard coded to do only a send, because that's like the Solidity old school best practices. You do sorry, send.
Yeah,
transfer, transfer.
Yeah, that's fair. So this gets a little bit more murky because there's like half of us. So that group of people I was saying that's been screaming at people to stop switching on gas costs. Half of us have also been screaming at people, don't rely on the gas stipend being enough to do anything. And the other half have been saying, oh yeah, use the gas stipend, it's safe. So you are right. There has been mixed message from us and auditors on that topic. It's getting better. Like, I've seen more and more auditors now saying, don't do this. But you're correct. There is more disagreement on that, so I'll concede.
Earlier in the conversation, Peter, you mentioned that the Geth client was close to basically option 30 minus not having the 2972, that the Geth code is kind of closest to that option currently.
I think Light Client knows best, actually.
Oh,
Sorry, could you ask that again?
That the option 30, so everything except for the 2972, the wrapped legacy transactions, that the Geth code is closest to that version.
Yes.
So, and then other clients, so it kind of still goes back to, if we do, like, the thing we're closest to today, is our other clients also in a similar position as far as where we are developmentally?
Yeah, from Open Ethereum side.
In a similar direction, there was a lot of discussion around half a year ago, maybe 4 months, about what was called the ungassed, so make gas non-observable in EVM at all. And they didn't go anywhere, at least as far as I know. Maybe the opposite would be better, to make it observable. So for the same way, like, yes, people can hard code 2300 gas for some operation. If they can get the data what this operation will cost, like in real time before making a call, it may have been solved their problems, but it was never introduced in this direction. I think it was only introduced in opposite one. So like hide the gas semantics completely from people.
Yeah,
It will not
it wouldn't solve
everywhere.
anything of any of these problems.
Like it wouldn't work everywhere, because in complex interactions, they obviously will not try to kind of estimate precisely how much gas they want to specify in a call. But at least for a simple one where you can literally try to say, well, it's going to be a load log and a single S store, maybe single log, and maybe 100 for additional expenses, they can at least do better than they do now.
Okay.
It won't solve any existing problems.
Yeah, let's stay focused on the stuff for today, I think. But I think someone's writing up option 35 right now.
Yeah, option 35 is
what
we're
we're
talking about.
circling on right now basically is whether or not we can get by with dropping access list transactions. Correct? Is that
That's the latest thing we're stuck on, and once we get past that, I think we're downhill from there.
what would people need to be comfortable dropping that? I guess that's maybe the question that we need to figure out. I mean, it sounds like we're not going to get bulletproof knowledge that it definitely doesn't break anything. If we ran it over the past 2 million blocks and didn't find any transactions that caused problems, and that was, that analysis was done, would there be people here who still would not be comfortable rolling out the gas price increases without the access list transaction type?
And I think part of it is that 2930 also has stuff that's beneficial beyond just fixing or patching up the problem of yeah.
When you say that, are you talking about like what Martin mentioned about
Yes.
like witnesses and things?
Mhm.
Well, so I'm not saying that we don't ever do 2930. I'm just saying that it's unfortunate to do 2930 without doing it on top of 2718, and 2718 gets all problematic because of SSC and things like that. And so if we're pretty sure that we're going to do 2718 coming up, then we just do 2930 with 2718 coming up, because if we don't need it now, then all of a sudden Berlin gets really easy.
I think we actually can do 2930 and 2718 for Berlin, and it wouldn't be take a super long time, right? Or
Yeah, that's what we're closest to developmentally having that already ready.
Yeah, I think that's true for Besu as well. Like option 30 is probably what we're closest to and would be the path of least resistance.
I mean, technically,
except, and I'm okay with that, and I'm not going to argue against it. What I'm suggesting is that we can, if we don't even need to do 29, I've got my numbers all mixed up. If we don't even need to do the access list transaction type at this stage, then we can do it in a better way when we do SSZ based 2718. Anyways, just like we don't have any concrete reason why we need access lists right now.
So there are actually some concrete. If you look at the old EIP 1884 security analysis, there are a lot of contracts that were found: the capped vault and the Nexo crowd sale and the EBC fund and some crowd machine compute token crowd sale that were hit by 1884, and these would basically be hit again and similar like them.
Yeah, it's seeming like the things are stacking up more in favor of putting an EIP 2930 access list in, because the analysis alone is going to take weeks, if not a month, and then we would be able to make a decision. And there's a chance that decision would be we need to keep it in. And if we're going to put in that, if that's something we want to put in eventually anyway, even though putting it in right now might not be the best format to do it, we can't.
It's the what we have ready. The maximally safe thing that we could ship in the shortest timeline includes 2930
and 2718. It sounds
and
like
and 2718, and then maybe 2972. But I haven't heard many people say that we need it anymore.
Yeah, I'm not seeing people advocating for that. So I think I like option 30 going forward, and if we can just declare that today, and update YOLO, whichever YOLO we want to put it in.
Before that, I just want to hear from each client that there isn't anything in 2972. Like, just go through them that they see that we need to just like exclude that explicitly.
Yeah, or if any client wants to speak up on that, I guess that's a better way to.
Yeah,
go about it.
like for Geth or Besu, is there anything from 2972 that you guys would need, or when you're doing your funny stuff to try to make stuff work in the meantime?
We don't think it should be a blocker for Berlin, so option 30 is probably the best.
Yeah, I would agree.
And Nethermind as well.
I think that's. Oh, is Thomas here?
Thomas is here. You might be muted.
He said in Allcore does that he's okay with anything, so he does not care. Yeah.
And then Open Ethereum would also be fine with dropping 2972.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go with option 30 then.
Cool.
What's the next hard fork, or what's the next date? It's the 11th. So, as far as that goes, we're going with option 30. That is dealing with the first bullet point of the agenda. The second bullet point for ETH6X support, option A versus option B. That's a separate conversation, right? Is that dependent on anything that we just talked about, or?
Yeah, sorry, just to make it clear from the chat, because I don't know if this is on the live stream, but Thomas said that Nethermind is fine with option 30 in the chat.
Wonderful. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. We have a little less than 15 minutes left, but this next one hopefully will be a little shorter. But I guess before we do that, what needs to change in the specs repo, James, for us to know where we're at on these EIPs that we just decided on for option 30?
Nothing, actually.
Oh.
Is there? I'll go through and
Is that
look right now.
correct? I thought 20. I'll fix whatever needs to be fixed. I'll handle it. 2930, I believe, will need to be touched. Maybe I'll check it out though.
Then, yeah,
The EIP might, but
Great,
the specification list still is 2565, 2315, 2929, 2930, and 2718.
2718 we are doing. I got that confused with 2972. Okay, great.
Yep. And
Sounds good.
And yeah, just to be clear on that, I guess before we do the networking stuff, so does that mean YOLO v3 will be the list for Berlin? I assume so. And if so, I think we still had the BLS precompile as part of YOLO v3. We should probably remove that, right? So that the YOLO v3 spec is just this whole bundle that we discussed for Berlin.
I don't think it's in there. I think
we already had removed it.
Yeah, that one's removed.
Okay, great. So what's in the spec right now? Yeah, I'm looking at it. Is YOLO v3, and that's what we'll put on we'll make official for Berlin. Is that right?
Yeah, YOLO v3
Yes.
plus whatever was in v1 and v2, right?
No.
YOLO v3 has all that. No, exactly. YOLO
No.
v3 is the right list.
Oh, YOLO v3. Yeah.
Yes, because the YOLO v1 and 2 have the BLS precompiles, which YOLO v3 doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's this 5 EIPs.
Okay. So if we can get that stood up before the next Alcore Dev call, we'll have like some I guess preliminary data on how it's all working out for Berlin.
Great. Okay, so to-dos are Micah's going to go in, touch any EIPs that need to be changed, and do a PR on the ETH1 specs repo to update the commit hash for whatever needs to be put in for YOLO v3, right?
I can update 2930 if necessary. I'll need to take a look at it. I don't know how to do the other thing you just said though.
So in YOLO v3, the specs page, I'll post it in Zoom chat. We have commit hashes for ones that are, if there was an update like fairly recently. Just a link to the commit hash for what version to implement. And so we might need that for 2930.
I'll work with you or James on figuring out how to do that.
Yep.
I think there for 2930, the thing that led to this conversation was trying to just decide what the RLP format for 2930 is. I think there's still value in having some discussion there, but it's nothing contentious. It's just like, what order do we want the fields to be in, kind of stuff. So I think Martin had some thoughts on that. I don't know if you have some time later this next week or early next week that we can just go over and hash that out.
Sure.
Great. The next item on the agenda is ETH/6x support, option A versus option B. And if you click on that, it'll take you to Discord. Here, was it? Oh, well, maybe it won't let me. I'll post it in the Discord for the All Core Devs chat. So, there we go. Sorry about that. Oh, there it is. Okay, so that's Peter talking about the two options for rolling out the new versions of the networking protocol. So I think whenever basically people thumbs up the post, and then Artem went for option A, Open Ethereum was looking at option B and liking that. Open Ethereum says B, and I think that might have been the only clients that spoke up as like speaking on behalf of their client.
I think for Basu we said B as well.
Yeah, I think did I not mention that? Yeah, Basu said B. So what about Nethermind? Have you happened to look at that and have a suggestion or a way you want to go?
I think Nethermind indicated they're not actually here. They're just listening.
Ah, got it. No problem. All right, we can get their answer soon, but it's tending toward option B currently.
Yeah.
Is there any updates on the Geth side for this discussion?
No, I mean, it's we've heard that people prefer option B, so we'll use option B.
Okay. Sounds good. Pending anybody doing a showstopper, I really don't want to do option B, so we need a lot more discussion or changes. I think we should go with option B. That's good.
Should we read out what it is?
Yeah. So option B is we allowed type transactions in earlier ETH protocol versions, but number one, Geth will implement 66 request ID before Berlin. So after Berlin, all Geth nodes on the network will be guaranteed to speak ETH66. And then Geth will drop ETH63 support this year, ETH64 support by spring 2021, and ETH65 support by summer 2021. So yeah, that's option B. So I think everyone understands that. Are there any questions or considerations or anything else I'm missing on this one?
Nethermind has said that option B is better from their point of view. They're in the chat. They're just not. He's not
sure
on voice right now.
Okay, sounds good. Then we'll go with option B. So that's settled. Final go, no go for Berlin EIPs. We kind of just did that. It's everything in YOLO v3 plus Micah may be updating a commit hash for EIP 2930.
Yep. And 2972 is not included.
Yes. There's one more thing on the agenda. And before we go on, is everything with YOLO v3 in Berlin kind of good? Is there anything else we need to talk about there that I missed out on?
Nope.
I don't know if we want to discuss this further, but I didn't really get a clear answer on if there was any desire to look at changing the transaction signature serialization scheme for 2930.
So I thought that you mean from SSZ to something else, or is this the thing we're doing in 2930?
The thing we're doing in 2930, because like I said, the serialization format that we choose for the signature to build the signature hash, this is something that we cannot change in the future. And so I kind of was hoping we could decide on one format to use, at least, some sort of in perpetuity. That way it's not a discussion that has to happen again. If we want to move everything to SSC, we don't have to further discuss, 2930 happened to be, signature hashes were built with RLP, so should we deprecate those transactions, et cetera, et cetera.
Anybody have any comments on that? What's the default light client? Is it just gonna go, what's it, RLP or something?
Right now it's RLP, and I'm not necessarily
Yeah.
opposed to RLP. My feeling is just it kind of seems like it would be nice to break apart what we understand as the serialization format for the protocol and the special format that we build these transaction signature hashes with. And it seems like SSE is maybe the most simple serialization format we could think of. And that's something that we could just say, even in the future, in 20 years, if we decide that SSE is no longer appropriate in the protocol, it's very simple to serialize transactions, to sign them. And so we will continue supporting those for a long time.
I'm getting the feeling we might just be burnt out for the discussion around that today.
That's fine.
But unless anyone has any comments, but bringing it up in the All Core Dev chat and putting it on the agenda for next time, we'll probably be able to discuss that more if that's something that can be discussed before we start implementing.
Sounds good.
Okay. Other EIPs. This is the last one. We have about 4 minutes, so we'll just wrap this up with an overview of this, and if anyone has any, like, 1 or 2 comments. Light client talking about EIP 2618, limit account nonce to 2 to the 64th power.
Does this say 18 or 81?
2681. I read that backwards.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know if I put the wrong thing on there. Yes, 2681. This is an EIP that Alex wrote earlier this year. The idea is that building the witness format, there is some complexity in dealing with these arbitrary length integers. And as currently specified, the account nonce theoretically could grow to very large numbers. And so this EIP is basically retroactively saying that we will limit account nonces to 2 to the 64 minus 1. Right now, I looked up the current highest account nonce in the state try, and it's approximately 29 million. It's the Ether Mine Coinbase account that sends out the disbursements. Yeah, that's a lot of gas spent.
Oh my.
Yeah. So I don't really know what the proper way of doing some sort of EIP like this where it's retroactive, but it's a very small change that I think a lot of clients have already implemented. I believe Geth has implemented nonces as being unsigned 64-bit integers. I think that this is how many clients have done this. Is there any opposition for accepting this or moving it forward?
I think we could mark it as final.
Okay. What's the proper way of sorry, go ahead.
My only minor request, and not enough to stop this from going through, but would be 2 to the 52nd or lower, so that way JavaScript number doesn't have problems. Since I think 2 to the 52nd is way more than we're ever going to need. Like, that's the end of the universe kind of numbers. Again, I don't want to hold back the CIP if there's, like, that's not my opinion is not strong enough to hold it back, but that would be a minor preference, is 2 to the 52nd.
Any comments on that?
I mean, does it really matter? Actually, because in practice, it's never going to reach either.
We could just do this again in a couple of years, and we can say that, let's just make it 2 to the 52nd. I think the fact is that we're going from something that's very arbitrary length to fixed length. And if we choose it as 2 to 64 today, we could potentially reduce it again in the future. It's not going to be something that comes up, in 5 years.
I believe as soon as we put this into SSE, it actually does matter, because SSE is a fixed width for, like, you need to set the number of bytes. So I guess 64 and 52 are the same number of bytes. Is that correct? My math is weak.
64 bits, and it was 64 bits.
That's off by a byte, but they're close.
Okay, so you're saying that this could potentially become an issue when we begin doing SSE. Is that really the case?
So I don't agree that it would be an issue, because it doesn't say anything about changing it to be a fixed width 64 length thing. It's just that it's limited to between 0 and this number.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess I'm not sure what that means in terms of SSE. Is there a representation for something that's arbitrary length integers?
So if we say this is 64 bytes and then we encode this in ETH2 somehow, it ends up needing to be SSE encoded for whatever reason.
Yeah, but we
Then
don't say
we need-
it's 64 bytes.
Sorry,
I
64
mean, the
bits.
ETH doesn't say
Like,
that the field is exactly represented in always represented using 64 bytes. Just say that the maximum value of this number.
I see. Okay. Sure. Like I said, my preference is to say the maximum value is 2 to the 52nd, just because that way JavaScript can use a number instead of a big int. Again, we don't have to talk about it here, and I won't hold up the EIP for that if people disagree.
But just to clarify, because if we were to say instead that this is now a 64 byte thing, then that would modify the consensus encoding in the try for every account object. So that would seriously screw with everything. So that's not what this EIP is about.
Okay, that is a good point. So as the EIP is, then in terms of just saying that the account nonce, we're not changing any representation, we're just limiting it to the 64. This is okay to move to final.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Great.
All right.
Yeah, and also it's good just because there are some JSON tests there that have some weird nonce numbers. We have some discrepancies with Gef, with some tests. So yeah, having some sign limits for this, it will be nice also.
And before moving it to final, should we put it in last call for 2 weeks? Just because I know there's like some RSS feeds and whatnot that fetch that. So I think maybe we can move it to final next Alcor devs if in the next 2 weeks nobody's kind of stood up and blocked it for a reason.
Yep.
I can do that.
Let's do that. Last call for 2 weeks. We are out of time. Thanks everyone for coming today. And welcome Light Client as one of the new EIP editors. We've had some discussion on the EIP editor chat. There wasn't any dissent that anyone spoke up about. So Light Client is going to be an EIP editor now. Is there anything else? I think, yeah, that's everything on the agenda. So we will meet again in 2 weeks on December the 11th. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. See you.
Thanks, everybody. I really like everybody having their video on.
Yeah, let's do the video again next time.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks for suggesting that, Rye.